An excerpt from 1920s children's book titled An Impasse Art Waywick Share and Other Tales of Impossible Truths. Sadly, only a few copies of this book remain. Probably. I was only lucky enough to find a copy amongst my grandmother's old things in the closet upstairs. Here's how the story goes. In the late part of the 14th century, in about 1360 or so, there lived a landowner called Waywick in England in the area currently known as Cheddar, who came across into his possessions a singular sort of servant. Of course, servants of this time were of a different sort of importance than servants that we know them today. But this servant was especially peculiar. Let's try that again. Of course, servants of this time were of a different sort of importance than servants that we know them today. But this servant was especially peculiar, mainly for the reason that Waywick did not have any servants aside from the one that mysteriously appeared in his workshop one afternoon long after tea. Waywick's eldest daughter was the first to notice the presence of the new man, and the first to have thought of him as a customer, though in all honesty, a queer sort of customer he would make, an even queerer servant as she would soon discover, and informed him that Waywick had departed ahead of his family for Massachusetts. Cold Tom, as he asked to be called, looked up from where he was sitting on the Waywick workbench and told the girl that he was Waywick's servant, and would be living with them for whatever period as Waywick saw fit. And thus, Cold Tom came to live with the Waywicks. Cold Tom ended up being a curious breed of servant, something of a combination of a butler, footman, coachman, and general man of business. Mr. Waywick consulted Tom on numerous tasks, much more than he should so. His family thought that he ought not so. But then, Tom always had a curious sort of pull around him, not least because of his rather strange appearance. Tom was rather tall and excessively thin, and his too large head was swamped with a great mass of downy blonde hair. His face was half covered in over the strawberry mark he claimed that he had since birth, and constructed wildly with his eyes, which twinkled a blue-green and stood out in the night, like pinpricks in St. Elmo's fire. But despite his strangeness, Tom was never disloyal to Waywick, and did his very best to serve the man in everything. His only fit of temper came when he destroyed a pot laid carelessly upon his hand by Waywick's daughter, Margarita, both of which were long and thin and fragile, and no one could hardly fault him for being crossed. Then, on the morning of April 4th, in the late part of the 1360s, Miss Waywick came home to find the cabinet in the kitchen where no cabinet had been before. It was, Tom explained, when she asked, a magical cabinet. He had thought it would explain that it would be very cruel for Mr. Waywick not to grant his wife a restful place to stay instead of working all day. He had often begged Waywick to be more forgiving to his wife. Miss Waywick wanted to know where the cabinet led. Oh, to a magical place where all care was lifted from your shoulders, and as long as you stayed, you can live in the complete and utopic happiness. And that Miss Waywick should see for herself. Miss Waywick did not know what utopic meant, but asked if the husband knew of this. Cold Tom replied, but of course he did. And seeing the error of his ways, he had asked Tom especially to find it for Miss Waywick. Oh, then it was all right then, said Miss Waywick, and went into the cupboard. On that day, a total of 137 people disappeared into that cupboard that afternoon, never to be seen again by any Englishmen or women, including Mr. Waywick, his middle and youngest daughter, the nurse, 8 of his neighbors, most of the town's children, a parish priest, and several of his brothers and sisters. Only Waywick's eldest daughter, Mary, did not go in, and told the kingsmen, where they were informed of the matter of what happened. My father entered some time ago, to try to persuade the people to leave the cupboard. He has not come back out yet. But of Cold Tom, no traces could be found. And I must not omit to say that in 1914, an archaeological dig was conducted in the northern part of England and on the craggy coast or region, on what appeared to be a site of the towns of prehistoric origin, where the team members found, under two stones laying against one another, stairs leading down into the earth. In a subterranean room of about 20 feet long by 16 feet wide, they found over 100 corpses, all bearing marks of having lived nearly some 600 years ago, all sitting there, knees drawn up to their chins and their arms wrapped around their legs. Aside from the sheer scale of bodies found and the curious positions they were found in, the only thing that the archaeological team could not account for was the apparent recentness of their deaths, which, to all intents and purposes, was only several days beforehand.